You're wearing a mask right now, not a physical one, but something far more sophisticated and infinitely more deceptive. You've been wearing it so long, you've forgotten it's there. You've worn it so well that you believe it's your actual face. This mask has a name, a profession, a personality that fits neatly into society's expectations. It smiles when it's supposed to smile, says what it's supposed to say, wants what it's supposed to want. And beneath this mask, suffocating in darkness, is your true self, the person you were born to be before the world told you who you should be. Carl Jung spent his entire life studying this tragedy, and what he discovered will either terrify you or set you free. Becoming your true self isn't just possible, it's the entire point of being human. But here's what makes Jung different from every self-help guru who promises to reveal your authentic self in 10 easy steps. Jung understood that becoming who you truly are isn't about adding something new. It's about uncovering what's been buried. It's not about improvement. It's about excavation. It's not about becoming better. It's about becoming whole. And wholeness, Jung discovered, requires you to journey into the very parts of yourself you've spent your entire life avoiding. The privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are. These aren't just pretty words. They're a declaration of war against everything that keeps you small, fake, and fractured. Because Jung discovered that we don't just hide our true selves from others, we hide them from ourselves. We bury them so deep that we forget they exist. We create what Jung called the persona, the mask we wear in public, and then we make the fatal mistake of believing we are the mask. Think about it. Who are you when no one's watching? Who are you in those 3 a.m. moments when the mask slips and something raw and real emerges? Who were you before they told you to be quiet, to fit in, to be realistic, to stop dreaming? That person didn't disappear. They went underground. They became what Jung called the shadow, the rejected, hidden, denied parts of yourself that contain not just your darkness, but your light, not just your wounds, but your power. The process Jung called individuation, becoming who you truly are, isn't a luxury for people with too much time on their hands. It's a psychological necessity. Without it, you remain a fraction of yourself, living a borrowed life, dying with your music still inside you. With it, you become what Jung envisioned, a whole human being who has integrated all parts of themselves, who has faced their dragons and discovered they were guarding treasure. But let me warn you now, this journey is not for the faint of heart. Becoming your true self requires you to face everything you've been running from. It requires you to descend into your own underworld and confront the monsters you've created. It requires you to sacrifice the comfortable lies for uncomfortable truths. Most people would rather stay fragmented than face what wholeness demands. Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life, and you will call it fate. This is the heart of Jung's revelation. You think you're making free choices, but you're not. You're running programs installed in childhood. You're avoiding what wounded you. You're seeking what you think will complete you. You're projecting onto others what you refuse to see in yourself. And all of this is happening below the threshold of awareness, in the vast unconscious that contains everything you've forgotten, rejected, or never knew about yourself. The persona, your social mask, isn't evil, it's necessary. You need it to function in society, to have a job, to relate to others. The problem comes when you identify with it completely, when you forget it's a mask and believe it's your face, when you sacrifice everything real about yourself to maintain an image, when you're so invested in seeming good, successful, or normal that you lose contact with what you actually are. Jung saw this everywhere. People who had achieved everything society said would make them happy, but felt dead inside. Successful businessmen who dreamed of being artists, but couldn't risk their reputation. Perfect mothers who secretly resented their children for trapping them. Religious leaders who preached love while harboring secret hatreds. The persona was intact, but the soul was screaming. And then there's the shadow, Everything you've pushed into unconsciousness because it didn't fit your image of yourself. Your anger, if you see yourself as always kind. Your vulnerability, if you see yourself as always strong. Your creativity, if you see yourself as practical. Your sexuality, if you see yourself as pure. The shadow contains everything you've said, "I'm not that" about. But here's Jung's revolutionary insight. You are that. And until you acknowledge it, it controls you. Everyone carries a shadow, and the less it is embodied in the individual's conscious life, the blacker and denser it is. The shadow isn't just your personal darkness, it's also your rejected light. Maybe you were told you were too much, too sensitive, too creative, too intense, so you dimmed yourself. You pushed your brightness into shadow. Now you project it onto others, either worshiping them for having what you've disowned or hating them for reminding you of what you've rejected in yourself. The process of becoming your true self begins with shadow work, the terrifying and liberating practice of facing what you've hidden. This isn't therapy where you talk about your feelings. This is archaeological excavation of your psyche. It's looking at what triggers you and asking why. It's examining your projections and owning them. It's finding the gold in what you've called garbage. Jung discovered that the shadow often first appears in dreams. The scary figure chasing you, that's a rejected part of yourself trying to integrate. The same-sex figure you're fighting, that's your disowned qualities seeking recognition. The house with locked rooms, that's your psyche showing you what you've sealed off. Dreams aren't random neural firing. They're your unconscious trying to balance your conscious one-sidedness. But the journey to true self goes deeper than just shadow integration. Jung identified what he called the collective unconscious, layers of psyche that connect you to all humanity. In these depths live the archetypes, universal patterns that shape human experience. The hero, the mother, the wise old man, the trickster. These aren't just symbols. They're living energies that can possess you if you're unconscious of them, or empower you if you relate to them consciously. When you're unconscious, you don't live the archetypes, they live you. The man possessed by the hero archetype can't admit weakness. The woman identified with the mother archetype can't stop caretaking. But when you become conscious of these patterns, you can work with them rather than being worked by them. You can access their power without being inflated by it. The meeting with oneself is, at first, the meeting with one's own shadow. This is where most people quit. They start the journey inward, hit the first layer of what they've rejected, and run back to the surface. It's too painful, too shameful, too threatening to the image they have built. But Jung insisted that there's no way around, only through. You can't skip the shadow and get to the light. You can't bypass the dragon and claim the treasure. Here's what shadow work actually looks like. You start noticing your emotional reactions. What makes you irrationally angry? That's shadow. What qualities in others do you despise? Shadow. What do you judge harshly? Shadow. But instead of justifying these reactions, you turn them into questions. Why does that bother me so much? What part of myself am I seeing in them? What have I disowned that's seeking recognition? This isn't about becoming what you hate. It's about acknowledging that you contain all human possibilities, the capacity for cruelty and kindness, for cowardice and courage, for betrayal and loyalty. When you own your full spectrum, you stop projecting onto others. You stop needing them to carry your disowned parts. You become psychologically responsible. But individuation goes beyond shadow work. Jung described encountering the anima or animus, the contrasexual aspect of your psyche. For men, the anima represents the feminine qualities they have rejected: feeling, intuition, relationship, beauty. For women, the animus represents the masculine qualities they have disowned: thinking, assertion, independence, logic. These aren't stereotypes, but psychological realities. We all contain both masculine and feminine energies, but we typically develop one at the expense of the other. The man who has rejected his anima becomes brutal, cut off from feeling and relationship. He projects his soul onto women, expecting them to carry his emotional life. The woman who has rejected her animus becomes possessed by negative masculine energy, critical, dogmatic, controlling. She projects her mind onto men, expecting them to think for her. But when you integrate these contrasexual aspects, you become psychologically whole. You don't need someone else to complete you because you've completed yourself. The privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are. But who is that really? It's not just your ego plus your shadow. It's not just your conscious plus your unconscious. Jung pointed to something beyond all pairs of opposites, something he called the self, capital S. This isn't the ego self that says, I want or I think. This is the totality of your being, conscious and unconscious, personal and transpersonal, human and divine. The self is what you were before socialization split you into acceptable and unacceptable parts. It's what remains when all masks fall away. It's the organizing principle that's been guiding your individuation all along, even when you didn't know it. Every crisis that cracked your persona, every encounter with shadow, every dream that disturbed your conscious attitude, all were the self calling you home to wholeness. But here's what's crucial. Becoming your true self doesn't mean becoming perfect. It means becoming complete. It doesn't mean having no shadows. It means knowing your shadows. It doesn't mean being without flaws. It means integrating your flaws into a larger wholeness. The individuated person isn't a saint. They're real. They've faced their demons and found them to be teachers. They've integrated their opposites and found peace in paradox. Jung himself modeled this. He wasn't a guru pretending to have transcended human struggles. He had affairs, struggles, breakdowns. He built a tower where he could be completely himself, away from professional personas. He painted mandalas to track his psychological state. He dialogued with figures from his unconscious and wrote it all down in the Red Book. He didn't present a perfect image. He presented a whole human being and process. The journey to true self often begins with what Jung called a loss of soul, a moment when your persona cracks and you can't maintain the image anymore. Maybe it's a midlife crisis. Maybe it's burnout. Maybe it's depression that no achievement can cure. This isn't a breakdown. It's a breakthrough waiting to happen. It's your true self saying, enough. It's time to come home. But most people miss the opportunity. They patch up the persona and keep going. They find a new addiction to numb the call. They throw themselves harder into work, relationships, spirituality, anything to avoid the journey inward. Because that journey requires admitting you've been living someone else's life. It requires grieving who you thought you were. It requires sitting in the uncertainty of not knowing who you are while you're becoming who you're meant to be. Your visions will become clear only when you can look into your own heart. Who looks outside, dreams. Who looks inside, awakes. This isn't metaphorical. Jung discovered that when you truly turn inward, when you dialogue with your unconscious through dreams, active imagination, and creative expression, you access wisdom that your conscious mind could never reach. You discover that you're not making this journey alone, that there's an intelligence within you that knows the way. This intelligence speaks in symbols, not concepts, in dreams, not dissertations, in synchronicities, not strategies. When you're aligned with your true self, meaningful coincidences multiply. The right book falls off the shelf. The perfect teacher appears. Doors open that shouldn't. Not because you're special, but because you're finally cooperating with your own becoming. But here's what nobody tells you about becoming your true self. It's lonely. Not because you're alone, but because you can no longer participate in collective unconsciousness. You can't pretend things are fine when they're not. You can't engage in small talk when your soul craves depth. You can't betray yourself for approval because you know the cost. You become an outsider to the inside of collective normalcy. Yet, this loneliness births authentic connection. When you're real, you attract real. When you're whole, you attract whole. When you've integrated your shadow, you're not triggered by others' shadows. When you've found yourself, you can see the self in others, even when they can't see it themselves. You become what Jung called a light in the darkness, not because you're better than others, but because you've done your work. The process never ends. Individuation isn't a destination. It's a way of traveling. You don't become your true self once and for all. You become it again and again, each time at a deeper level. Each life stage brings new challenges, new shadows to integrate, new aspects of self to embody. The teenager individuates from parents, the adult individuates from collective values, the elder individuates from ego itself. The most terrifying thing is to accept oneself completely. Terrifying because it means accepting your darkness along with your light, accepting your failures along with your successes, accepting your ordinariness along with your uniqueness. But in this acceptance lies freedom. When you've seen your worst and not run away, what can anyone do to you? When you've integrated your demons, who can demonize you? When you know who you are, who can tell you who to be? This is the gift of becoming your true self, not happiness in the conventional sense, but something far more valuable: meaning, authenticity, depth, the knowledge that you're living your life, not someone else's, that you're dying your death, not a standardized exit, that whatever happens, you met the challenge of becoming who you were meant to be. Jung knew this wasn't easy. He knew most people would choose the familiar suffering of the persona over the unknown territory of individuation. He knew the collective would resist anyone who stepped out of unconscious participation, but he also knew that consciousness, once attained, can't be reversed. Once you've tasted authentic being, you can't go back to pretending. Once you've touched your true self, all substitutes lose their appeal. So the question becomes, are you ready? Are you willing to face what you've avoided? Are you prepared to integrate what you've rejected? Are you brave enough to become who you are, knowing it means letting go of who you're not? Because your true self is waiting. It's always been waiting. In your dreams, in your symptoms, in your longings, in everything you've called wrong about yourself that might actually be right. The journey to wholeness isn't for everyone, but if you've listened this far, it's probably for you. Not because you're special, but because you're called. Something in you knows there's more. Something in you is tired of the performance. Something in you is ready to come home to yourself. Shadow and light, wounds and gifts, all of it integrated into a wholeness that the world desperately needs. Your true self isn't a better version of your false self. It's a completely different being, one that includes everything you've excluded, one that embraces everything you've rejected, one that integrates everything you've split, one that becomes what Jung envisioned, a conscious participant in your own becoming, a whole human being in a fragmented world. The path is treacherous. The rewards are everything. The choice, as always, is yours. But now you know what's at stake. Not just your happiness, but your wholeness. Not just your success, but your soul. Not just your life, but your truth. Will you answer the call? Will you begin the descent? Will you face what must be faced to become who you truly are? The journey of 1,000 miles begins with a single step, and that step is always inward. Your true self is waiting. It's time to remove the mask. It's time to come home.